Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kalila Rowley-Billy, Senior Organizer with Greater Cleveland Congregation, and also celebrating 15 years as an organizer with this wonderful organization as well. And so this is about an organization that operates in real time, put people first, but also understanding the importance of honoring those who led the way for us. And so they have questions that they're going to share with each other. So we'll start off with Reverend Dr. Jawan Zakovin and his question to Rabbi Josh Caruso.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So good to see everyone on this grand occasion and to be with my friends and my colleagues. I have not seen some in quite some time except through a Zoom room, so it's good to see them in the flesh. We often say that GCC has had many founders, and that is true. And some of them are on this podium, and some of them are actually in this room on today. You are one of the founders of GCC. But I've said this in his presence before, that GCC has had many founders, but it probably has had only one father, and that is Rabbi Josh Caruso. And so I think to start the conversation, my brother, to talk a little bit about the inspiration, the thoughts, and the early seeds that went into what blossomed into Greater Cleveland Congregations.
Thank you, Reverend Colvin, and appreciate you hosting us, and very Reverend Tracy Lynn, my friends, my colleagues. I'm smart enough to surround myself with really talented people. That's the secret, that's the secret. All right, I would say when we started entertaining the idea at Fairmount Temple around congregation-based community organizing, that's what we used to call it, CBCO, congregation-based community organizing. I will tell you, maybe Ari can concur with this, there weren't a whole lot of Jewish congregations that were like all in on community organizing. It really, for lack of a better term, it hadn't come into vogue in the movement, not just in the Reform movement, but in any Jewish movement. There were Jews who were always involved in community organizing. If you look at the founding individuals of the movements of Industrial Areas Foundation, Saul Alinsky, Ari Lipman, James Pearlstein, all right, number of our great organizers, they're Jewish. There's a Jewish penchant for this work. It's in our bones. The most celebrated Jewish holiday is Passover, and there's a reason for that, because we focus on freedom, we focus on justice. So the thing that was compelling to me was that Jews were involved in this work, but really weren't using their faith-based values to dictate it. Even maybe they didn't articulate it that way. So in the Jewish world, there's a lot of Jews who are involved in justice work, but may not always ascribe it to their Jewish faith or to the prophets who came before them. So what was really compelling to me was, how do we, take the wonderful lessons of our faith, particularly our prophets, and how do we channel that into this work? And beyond doing the mitzvah work that most congregations do, which is coat collectives and soup kitchens, which is such important work, but how do we go beyond that? How do we get to the root ills of our society? And that was really the crux of it. And then I remember it was a workshop Ari led, and he was a really master teacher, still is, I'm sure. And Ari taught about Rabbi Hillel, and that very famous quote from Rabbi Hillel, "If I am only for myself, who am I?" Right? "If I am not for myself, who am I? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" Okay, so this whole idea of, here we have our community organizer teaching about faith, teaching about a rabbi from the Talmud. And it compelled me that our community should be using our faith-based values that we preach about and that we pray about and transform them into the world. There was like a divide amongst many Jews I knew, including our community, who seemed to think that, maybe only faith-based values are raised up in the synagogue community, but not necessarily outside. And I wanted to build that bridge, and then to share that work with passionate involved inspirational colleagues was like just took everything to a new level. Yeah. All right. Should I?
And now, Bye-Bye Cruiser, you had a question for Pastor Colvin.
I do. Okay. So, Pastor Colvin, we saw the pictures of you when you were a little bit younger. Still a handsome guy. All right. So, and I remember when you were new to town, and there was a lot of noise around these new pastors who were coming in, and they were kind of, free thinkers. And there was already sort of a hierarchy of, black pastors in the community who were doing good work. But I always saw you, I always interpreted your interest as being very much a maverick. You were always someone who wanted to think for yourself, didn't necessarily need to follow the crowd. And you were also following in the footsteps of the great Reverend Otis Moss, right, who kind of established that sort of that penchant for justice. So there was something that was drawing me to you and your prophetic vision. But I've always wondered, what is it like to be a young pastor in town, young black pastor in town, knowing that there was a little bit of a hierarchy, a pecking order, and what inspired you to get involved with a bunch of, perhaps white suburbanite pastors to do this work?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I've had some time to really reflect on it, and there are two things that come to mind within the context of our community. I'm talking about the African American community. So the African American community really draws on the African concept of elder culture. And so we believe in elder culture. We believe in honoring elders. We believe in respecting elders. So elders within our church and even in our politics play a very important role. And so oftentimes you'll see many of our politicians who are elected officials will stay there 30 years, and there's this long kind of intractable tension between the younger and the older. And that exists not only in politics and in civil rights, but it exists in churches and in the work of social justice. And so there's always that reality that elder culture is a part of the dynamic that we wrestle with. And so there's this respecting and the honoring of not only elders, but the institutions that they establish. So when I arrived here in 2009, there were a number of established African-American clergy organizations that did exist. And of course, our church and my predecessor, who had retired, were also a part of that and were involved in the establishment of those. So naturally, it was expected for me to be engaged and involved. And I am on roll, I pay dues, our church is engaged, we send representatives, and like all of us, we are connected to our denominational affiliations, through our religious ties, and within our communities of shared culture, faith, and ethnicity. And so that should be honored and should be named. That our involvement as a church, or my involvement as a pastor in GCC, did not take me away from the established organizational institutions in the African American community, but I was drawing on history. And the history of social progress, even in the African American community, has been one of working together with a coalition of the conscientious and a coalition of the willing. I remember having this conversation with my predecessor, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss, because that's what every black preacher does when you have a problem in Cleveland. You call Dr. Otis Moss Jr. So I called Dr. Moss, and he and I had a very long conversation about this. And one of the things he reminded me in his very wise and quiet but yet strong and firm tone, and he talked about how the black churches could not have started HBCUs without Quakers, and how we could not have pushed forward the transformation of this country from a white supremacist state existing within the South to the breaking of the Union in the Civil War and the coming forth of a new country with the Reconstruction Amendments without this very radical left-wing progressive group called the abolitionists. And so the abolitionists, who were white, and Quakers helped establish our colleges. They helped create the wedge in society that created the battle that was going to decide on whether we were going to be a country that was going to have men be 3/5 and women have no value at all, those living in black skin. And so there's a long tradition of social building, social advancement of communities working together and communities working across the states and spaces of difference. We have this vision of the civil rights movement as if it was only African Americans. It was not only African Americans, and it wasn't all black people, right? It was, and many of those young people had to work against elder culture. SNCC was a group of college students at Tennessee State and Fisk, right? Dr. King was a 26-year-old new preacher in town who moved into Montgomery and had to find himself in the midst of a major uproar around the mistreatment of people in public transportation. The deeper you go into understanding of what has created social change in our country, you go and understand that we have only come this far through multiracial coalitions. Multiracial coalitions. Whether it is Freedom Summer, whether it is the Highlander School, whether it is SNCC, all of these have Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. This is the legacy, and this is what they are trying to keep from happening in America. They do not want America to become a multiracial democracy, because the last time we were working multiracially together as a collective, we transformed this country. And so I was simply leaning into a tradition that existed and we had to be reminded of. And I'll close and say this. I remember when we had a clergy meeting of African-American clergy in the O.M. Hoover Center, and Dr. Moss was speaking. And maybe some of our colleagues from other communities were present, but I know there were a lot of African-American pastors there. And I'll never forget these words he said. He said that many have tried before and fallen short. GCC may be Cleveland's last best hope to get this right. I remember at the Masonic Temple when a certain elected official, a certain mayor, got up and said, "We will see whether you last." But here we are 15 years later, stronger, better, looking, and wiser. But it was all because we were willing to not simply create anything new, but to lean into a history and a tradition that had always worked and had made this opportunity possible.
Thank you. Rabbi Caruso, you also had a question for Reverend Tracy Lynn.
And thank you, Reverend Colvin. And I think that was just reacting very quickly to that. I'll say that, part of I think for it was like exercising some muscles for some for Jewish communities, white communities, Protestant communities, to learn like what is it like to actually work with, right, and not like do for, but rather to work with. What does it mean to actually learn, to listen? That maybe we don't have all the answers. That was really important. That was a learning for me. I think we tried, that was important for our community. How do we work with? So, okay. Hello. Friend.
How are you?
All right. Reverend Linda's come from Michigan, which is so great now. She moved out, but we're so glad. We're so glad. All right. Yeah, come on. All right, we need some help from Jared Allen and, Evan Mobley. Okay, so Reverend Lind, you had been part of community organizing long before I had ever heard of it, long before it really came to Cleveland through GCC, but you go back. And in fact, not even in Ohio, you go back to community organizing. And I know it was like uneven. Your experiences of the community organizing were uneven. So actually approaching you for Ari to approach you and for us to approach you, we knew we were coming to someone who had already been through the rodeo a little bit, maybe had some learned experiences, maybe had a little bit of reticence. Tell us what kind of drew you to GCC, that you were able to sort of see GCC as its own entity, something perhaps distinct and separate. What was the value of it for you and your community?
Well, first, hello, Cleveland. It's great to be back here. It's been 10 years and to be back in this esteemed church. Wow. Before you and Ari approached me in 2010, when one of you called, I thought, oh God, here we go again. Because I go way back with Industrial Areas Foundation, the organizing network that helped us organize GCC. I go all the way back to the early 1970s in Toledo, Ohio, where I was a tenant organizer, and Saul Alinsky had come to town very briefly before he died. My second experience was in the early 1980s when I was a seminarian in the South Bronx, and they were organizing Bronx churches together. And my third experience was in the early 1990s when I was in Paterson, New Jersey, and then I attended 10-day training. How many of you have gone to national training? Raise your hand. Well, you know how intense that is, but back then I learned 4 key organizing lessons that I have consistently applied in my ministry, in my civic leadership, and to some degree in my personal life. Building and maintaining relationships is so crucial. And I learned that through IAF. And I learned that the one-on-one meetings are essential for building community. Secondly, I learned that there are no permanent enemies and there are no permanent allies. And sometimes we find ourselves with strange partners in issue campaigns. Thirdly, I learned that power does lie in organized people and organized money who have a clear vision, a purpose, a focus, and a strategy. And fourthly, and this was the hard part for me, I learned that you've got to sometimes set your own personal agenda aside for the greater good, but you never work against your own self-interest. So when I got to Cleveland in the early 2000s, there was another community-based organization in town, and I didn't really like their organizing style or their effectiveness. And I also didn't really like the way that many broad-based community organizations, including the IAF, treated women and treated the LGBT community. We were clearly second-class citizens that they needed. So when Ari and Josh approached me, I was really hesitant. And they insisted that they needed me and they needed this new pastor whom I had not yet met, named Jawanza Colvin. I had heard about him, but I hadn't met him. But the reason I knew about him was we went to the same seminary. He's a little younger than I am, but nonetheless, we went to Union Theological Seminary in New York. And so I thought, okay, we really have to organize the faith community. And like Reverend Moss, I thought, if not now, when? This is the time that we've really got to do it. And so I said, all right, here's the deal. I don't know if you remember this. I said, the deal is this. If Reverend Colvin agrees to join, and he agrees to apply the values of union, that is affirming diversity, respecting women and gay and lesbian and trans people, and refusing to divide and conquer along lines of race and gender, religion, and sexual identity. If he brings those values to the table and will hold on to them, I can get on board. And when you and I met, when all 3 of us got together with Ari, we agreed to those values and we decided to form a clergy leadership team, and the rest of it is history.
Let history show let history show that the first woman to ever speak from the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church pulpit was Coretta Scott King.
Yes.
The first openly gay woman to speak from the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church pulpit was the very Reverend Dean Tracy Lynn.
Yes.
And I'll add that, I just want to add that we needed, strategically, we needed Tracy. Reverend Lynn had the gravitas. She was in a civic, rooted civic institution in Trinity Episcopal Cathedral. She was highly respected in the community. She was embedded in the community. For those of you who don't know Reverend Lynn, a force of nature and incredibly inspirational. And so we knew that she was an important piece of this puzzle. And if she was in, then a lot of people, would be in. I mean, that was part of Ari's genius and work, is knowing who to tap on, right? And then who was going to bring the other people. That's why Ari did what he did, and that's why we got 2,000 people at that founding assembly.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that what Tracy taught us as leaders. And I think all of us, it's okay to be comfortable with tension. And the tension, and that's not just the tension outside of the organization as you work against forces within high civic, political, elected office, but the tension that's necessary within the organization to move the organization forward. Every meeting was not a kumbaya meeting. Every meeting was not, we weren't hugging it out. There were meetings that there were tension that existed. We adjourned because we all had other meetings to go to, but we never left the table. And I think it's Toni Morrison who has a quote Janetta Cole has a quote where Janetta B. Cole says, you talk through your differences until your differences no longer make a difference. So you stay and you still have the conversation. And you taught us that. You taught us the power of being comfortable with internal and external tension.
But part of that, thank you, but part of that is maintaining those relationships in those one-on-one meetings. So just like you were challenged a little earlier to connect with somebody in this room you don't know and make a date to talk to them, I would also invite you to think about somebody that has been a part of your civic life or your faith life together, with whom you're struggling or you've fallen away from over the issue of politics, and get together with them and have a conversation again, because there are no permanent enemies and there are no permanent allies. And right now, as I look out on this room, I say, man, we got to build some more allies here, especially among our younger congregants. You need to be building this back up again really strong, which leads me to quickly ask you to, 15 years later, why are you still doing this work? It's not easy. You're in a new position, or soon to be in a position of major power in this town. Why are you still doing this work, and why are you going to still hold your congregation accountable to GCC?
We're still living in silos. We're still not talking to each other. The circumstances of the world right now, regardless of what party you support, regardless if you support the state of Israel or not, we're not listening to each other. And worse, like if we're seeing someone in a synagogue or a mosque or whatever it may be, a person of a certain color, they're an avatar for some idea that somebody might think they have about you. So I think it's, for me, it's like this is the only way out. The only way out of the mess that we're in right now in the world is through. And we have to look at each other, and we have to be able to agree or disagree agreeably. So we just have to keep doing this work, keep talking to each other.
Great. Yeah. And Reverend Colvin, you now are not the new kid on the block. You've got a lot of gravitas in this town. Why are you still invested in GCC?
Well, a part of it it kind of reminds me of that classic scene in The Godfather 3, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. No. No, that's not the case. I just wanted to say that in front of all of you all.
That's a good Al Pacino right there.
Right, thank you. The work doesn't care who does it. The work does not care who does it. And if we get so caught up in our titles, we get so caught up in our position, and we get so caught up in that, the truth of the matter is the work is still waiting for someone to do it. And reality is that many of us have been given a great deal of advantages, but how much are you using your advantage to the advantage of the disadvantage? I'm in more rooms now than I was in 15 years ago, right? A lot of us now serve on boards that we did not serve on, and some of the people that we were pushing against 15 years ago, we're now in the rooms as board members, as vice chairs or chairs, where we're making the decisions about the money. We're making decisions about where the investments are. And the truth is, we're going through hell right now. And none of us can afford to sit back and wait for somebody. No one is coming to save us, y'all. No one is coming to save us. And so if we don't, taking Tracy's admonition, engage our young people, but that is also admonition to us who wanted to retire and to go into easy reclining yesteryears or later years of this kind of work. I look at, people like Mr. Addison, and I look at people like Jan, and I look at people who've never stopped doing, and Diana. I mean, I look at people who were doing this type of work before GCC and are doing this work while we have GCC, and it's that type of passion, that type of zealousness that we're going to need. So I'm doing it because the problem is still as potent, but the truth of the matter is that the wins are just as sweet. The wins are still sweet. The wins are still sweet. Yeah.
And I'll just add that agree with everything you said, and I want to just name it. There are people in America, citizens, who are being hijacked by our own government. Okay, people of color, people who have been born in this country and don't appear to pass the test of what an American looks like. We have a problem. We have people in power, in leadership, who are denying that this country still has a race problem. I don't see race. What are you talking about? We don't have a race problem. And they're gaslighting us into somehow believing that that's the case. And so, I would say, whatever differences we may have, there may be things that are going on miles and miles away, oceans away. We've got a lot of things we can be united on right here in this city.
I have the unfortunate task of ending this time, but while we're at it and in a clapping, let's give our 3 founding co-chairs of GCC a round of applause, a standing ovation. 15 years, power in progress.